All right. I think we're good to go. Hello and welcome aboard the live edition of the Gallant Says podcast. Live at youtube.com/Paul Gallant or twitch.tv/Gallant Says, on Twitter/X at Gallant Says, Instagram at Sports Gallant, Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. You can catch it live Monday and Thursday nights, and occasionally after major Houston sporting events. If you can't catch it live, you can check it out wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. If you ever have a question, gallantsays@gmail.com. Some comments to open things up. Sean Atonin comments on twitch.tv/Gallant Says, let's go. Poetic that the Ravens season will end the way it started, against the Texans. Well, let's wait a little bit on that front. Meanwhile, Dave's Not Here Man 713 asks, you're going to go live during the last playoff game of the weekend? Twice. We will be doing a post-game show and live stream, if I'm not mistaken, of the Texans-Ravens game from the ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 studios. And I will be doing a post-game show after the fact, wherever you get it. Okay, on this Monday, January 15th of 2024, we're going to talk about the wussification of the football fan and an annual Houston event that I now hate with the burning passion of 1,000 suns. More than I hate Titans fans, the Titans themselves. I really hate this thing. But first, let's talk about who the Houston Texans are going to be playing in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. They're heading on the road to take on the Baltimore Ravens for the second time this year. They played in week 1. The Ravens won 25-9. This after the Buffalo Bills rather handily took down the Pittsburgh Steelers 31-17 in a game that was postponed to today due to snow and frigid weather and a travel ban in order by New York's governor. This game, which will have Joe Buck and Troy Aikman on the call, has the Ravens as 9.5-point favorites per mybookie.ag. That first game between these two teams was, I think, a little bit closer than the final score indicated, but it still was a rather convincing win by Baltimore. They sacked C.J. Stroud 5 times in that game. The Texans' running game wasn't able to do much. This was back during the era where Dameon Pierce was their leading rusher. He had 11 carries for 38 yards. Devin Singletary did eventually come in. He was 7 for 15 on the game. Production elsewhere, Nico Collins did have a good game, maybe some stat padding, at least argued by some after the game, but he had 6 catches for 80. Dalton Schultz, not a great one, 2 catches for 4 yards on 5 targets. Tank Dell and Noah Brown, who aren't going to play in this one, Dell's out for the year. Noah Brown also announced as out for the year. 3 for 34 for Dell, 3 for 20. They didn't contribute that much in that game. Meanwhile, defensively, the first time between these two, it was one of Lamar Jackson's worst games statistically. He was 17 of 22, so he was completing a lot of passes, but it was for 169 yards. He threw an interception. He also was sacked 4 times, 6 carries for just 38 yards. Running the football for Baltimore, J.K. Dobbins got hurt in that game. He tore his ACL, so it was Gus Edwards and Justice Hill the rest of the way. Keaton Mitchell, who really came on strong for Baltimore down the stretch, averaging 8.4 yards a carry, did not play in that game, but also he will not play in the next game this coming Saturday either because he tore his ACL. So rather convincing game in Baltimore's favor, at least based off of the final score. I did think the Texans defense played pretty well in it, but C.J. Stroud was running for his life. But I do think things are a lot different for the Houston Texans this time around. I do think the offense has figured out a lot about itself. Number one, how to put out an offensive line that can actually protect C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud, meanwhile, has now 18, well, check that because he did miss the 2 games, 16 games of experience under his belt. You have a defense that is experienced, a lot of young players on it, that's healthy. I think this will be a good game. I think the 9.5-point spread is a bit much. If you had a gun to my head, would I pick Baltimore? Probably. But I think that the spread is perhaps too much, leaning on the last matchup between these two teams. Some Baltimore Ravens fun facts. Baltimore has won the last 6 games that they actually tried in. They beat the Bengals 34-20 in the last game that Joe Burrow played. Burrow injured his wrist in this game. Some people think it might have been hurt before the game. They took down the LA Chargers 20-10 the next week, held Justin Herbert in check. They played in a fun game against the LA Rams and won 37-31 in overtime thanks to a walk-off punt return by Tylan Wallace. They beat the shit out of the Jaguars 23-7 in Sunday Night Football. The Jaguars shot themselves in the foot a lot in that game, but it was a rather resounding thumping, especially in the second half. They beat the hell out of the 49ers 33-19, arguably the best team in the NFC, picking off Brock Purdy 4 times along the way. And then they really skull-fucked the Miami Dolphins 59-14 on New Year's Eve. 59-14. Jesus. Probably their most impressive win of the year. They didn't try the last game of the season against Cincinnati. You don't blame them. They had locked up home field advantage in the AFC. And you keep thinking back to that first game and what's different this time around. There are some different things for the Texans, some of which I listed, but there were a lot of injuries for the Texans going into that game. There was no Titus Howard, no Jimmy Ward, who's not going to play in this one. Scott Quessenberry and Kenyon Green, these guys were projected preseason starters along with Titus Howard. They couldn't go, so the offensive line really was in flux. During the game, they lost George Fant. The next play after Fant left, Michael Dieter allowed a sack and a forced fumble. Juice Scruggs was on IR. He had yet to play for the Houston Texans, and Jalen Petrie left the game with a long injury. So definitely different this time around. Some comments here. Art comments, Paulie G on Twitter. Caleb Leachman says Texans by 1,000. I'm not going that far. I'm not. Fun facts about the Baltimore Ravens. Let's continue them. And I apologize for my notes being a little bit disorganized here. But they have the number 1 rushing offense in the league, Baltimore. 2,661 yards. A 4.9 yards per carry average. That's 3rd in the league. So they run the ball and they run the football well. A lot of it has to do with Lamar Jackson, who was the team's leading rusher with 148 carries for 821 yards. As far as throwing the football, they're middle of the road when it comes to passing yardage, but they're 3rd in yards per attempt behind just San Francisco and Miami. And I think that's really the number that people should be looking at over yards total about how effective a quarterback is yards per attempt. So with Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson's had an MVP caliber year. There is no denying that. And his ability to run sets him apart from every quarterback in the league. And if there's anything that we know about bad weather, and it's expected to be not so great in Baltimore on Saturday, there's a 60% chance of snow on Friday. The forecast for Saturday at 4 is 23 degrees. It's supposed to drop to 19 degrees by 8 p.m. Eastern time. So with that in mind, okay, might be a little bit more difficult for the Ravens to throw the football to smaller wide receivers and Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham Jr., possibly a Mark Andrews return. But running quarterbacks, if we've learned anything from the AFC playoffs to this point, have done a pretty good job of breaking games open. Patrick Mahomes had 2 big runs for 41 yards on Saturday against Miami. Josh Allen, today, you saw him do that fake bullshit slide for a 52-yard touchdown run. He had 8 carries for 74. If you got a QB who can run, when the weather's bad, it's difficult to throw, it's difficult to catch, that is a nice ace to have in the hole. Now, CJ Stroud is more mobile than I think people believe him to be. He doesn't scramble that much, but he is capable when he scrambles. But more on along the lines of a Joe Burrow when Burrow scrambles. He can move, but you're not expecting him to move. You're expecting him to hang in there as long as he possibly can and then drop an accurate dart somewhere on the field. Who does Lamar Jackson throw to? This is probably the biggest question for Saturday's game. Mark Andrews is arguably the second best tight end and by second best, I mean de facto second best tight end to Travis Kelce in the NFL. David Njoku's had a very good year for Cleveland too, so maybe you want to give it to him. But as of 3 days ago, Mark Andrews was designated to return from injured reserve. He hasn't played since an ankle injury November 11th. If he plays, based off of how much success the Texans allowed the Browns tight ends to have, David Njoku and that other random fucker who had the big catch and run, if Mark Andrews is back, I would be pretty concerned about the Texans defense. The other guys that the Ravens throw to, Zay Flowers, we saw him week 1. He looks special. He's just fast, quick, on a level that very few wide receivers are. They nailed that pick in the first round. 77 catches for 858 yards and 5 touchdowns on the season. Also 8 carries for 56. Odell Beckham Jr. has been okay this year. Definitely not what they were expecting. Definitely not what they're paying him for. He does have a pretty good yards per catch, 16 plus, but 35 catches for 565 yards and 3 touchdowns in 14 games. If I remember correctly, and I have to watch this game back, but he and Derek Stingley seemingly got into it. Maybe it's an LSU thing. I don't know. But it seemed like they were not enjoying each other in the middle of that game. As far as the Ravens defense goes, it's pretty fucking good. Number 1 in the NFL in sacks. They have 60. They sacked C.J. Stroud 5 times in week 1. For comparison's sake, the Texans just set a franchise record with 46, 47 sacks this year. They had 60. It's basically what teams did to David Carr. They are 8th best against the pass in terms of total yards allowed. 2nd best in yards per attempt. Only Cleveland is better, but hey, look at what C.J. Stroud did against Cleveland in the first half. 5th in completion percentage allowed. This is a good defense. Maybe not so much against the run, where they are 14th total and 24th in yards per attempt. But this is definitely going to be a tough test. No team has played better than Baltimore in the NFL the last month, 2 months of the year. And that's why I would imagine Lamar Jackson is very likely to win the MVP. I didn't get to vote. The votes are already in. They're probably going to give it to Lamar Jackson. More fun facts about the Ravens. We do not like the Ravens, and we hope that Browns fans, who obviously might be a little bit bitter about the Texans beating them and the Texans having their draft pick next year, but hey, they do have C.J. Stroud, Ohio State, OHIO. Browns fans might empathize with rooting for the Texans because the Ravens are a stolen team. The Ravens were stolen from Cleveland by Art Modell, who is loathed there. They are bad people, much like those who had owned the Tennessee Titans. And I say bad people, I don't actually know them, but I mean, right, fuck Bud Adams for moving the Oilers to Tennessee. Fuck whatever Irsay, Robert Irsay, moved the Colts from Baltimore to Indianapolis. Indianapolis, why do they have a team? And yeah, fuck Art Modell for moving the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore. And you got to wonder what would have happened had the Browns not moved to Baltimore, because the year before, Bill Belichick actually had a pretty good season as head coach of the Browns. Would he have gone on to prominence as head coach of the Ravens? The Ravens did win a Super Bowl with Brian Billick only a couple of years later. They've won 2 total. And they have played the Texans in the playoffs before. You might remember it from the Texans' first appearance in the playoffs, 2011-2012 season, the year before the Ravens would actually win the Super Bowl for the second time, along with a guy that helped them win the year before in that game. Remember Jacoby fucking Jones? Jacoby Jones muffed the punt early in that Texans-Ravens game in 2011. And despite having TJ Yates under center, who really struggled, could have thrown 6 interceptions in this game. I think he only threw 2 or 3. The Texans were in it to the end. And it's largely due to the best offensive line in Houston Texans history. Dwayne Brown, shout out to my guy, left guard Wade Smith. Shout out to my guy, center Chris Myers. Right guard Mike Brizell. Right tackle Eric Winston. Those guys helped the Houston Texans run all over Baltimore in that game. Arian Foster had a great performance, but ultimately not enough. You have TJ Yates under center, and that team, you got to wonder in 2011 how far it would have gone if it had a healthy quarterback and if Jacoby Jones didn't muff that punt, because it set the Ravens up inside the 10-yard line. Does the game change entirely after that happens? I'm not sure. All I know is that I'm still a little pissed about Jacoby Jones muffing that punt. It's inside the 10, dude. Why are you trying to catch it? What are you doing? But he was always a bit of a knucklehead. I will say, seemingly a very nice guy. Never actually interacted with him, but, in games, doesn't exactly make the best of decisions. Not in the league anymore. Let's read some comments. You can do the whole comment thing on this live show. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant, Twitch.tv/Gallant Says. Also on Twitter @Gallant Says. And on Facebook, Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. Dave's not here, man. 713 comments. I saw today, Twitch.tv/Gallant Says, that the Ravens' home record is not as good as their road record. Sounds like our Astros. Yeah, but the Astros had a losing record at home. So no, it's not the same. Jesse Cast at youtube.com/Paul Gallant says, I think the Texans will struggle the whole game. They did struggle for much of the game against Baltimore. The offense, probably the worst performance by the offense all year. CJ Stroud looked like a deer that was just learning how to walk. And it was his first game. Ezequiel Tovar comments, does Lamar Jackson scare you more than their defense? It's a good question. The defense sacking CJ Stroud as much as it did and having as many sacks as it has this season does make me think that they can pressure him and perhaps get him to throw bad plays. But I do think Stroud has gotten a lot smarter with not taking bad sacks and not throwing bad footballs as the season has progressed. And honestly, he wasn't even doing it at first. So is the defense better than Lamar Jackson? The Texans defense held Lamar Jackson in check largely in that game. I think I feel better about the Texans' chances against Lamar Jackson than I do against the defense. But I feel better about both matchups this time around. His ability to move with his feet in the bad weather is perhaps what I'm most scared about when it comes to Lamar Jackson. As I said before, it's an ace in the hole. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant, Twitter.com/Gallant says... P. Babin comments on Twitter. Ravens starters haven't played in 2 weeks. A little rusty, maybe. That could be a factor. We'll see. Art also comments, CJ Stroud isn't Mike Vick, but he can get you some yards. Yeah, exactly. He is mobile. There's a big difference between he and Davis Mills last year, other than everything, is that Stroud can actually move, and Mills is a bit of a statue back there. Beast Mode Loading comments, youtube.com/Paul Gallant. I honestly think we have a really good shot at beating the Ravens. They haven't played in like 3 weeks, and I feel 9.5 underdogs is motivation for our Texans. But I do think the the Ravens will be focused on the Texans. I don't think this is going to be, by any means, an easy game for Baltimore in their eyes. I think they're looking at this and as a team that has impressed so much, they're not going to be taking them lightly. John Harbaugh's a good coach. This isn't, Mike McCarthy. It's not Bill Belichick in his prime, but this is a team that I think will be focused for the game. Texas Tags comments, if the Texans win against the Ravens, I'll donate $40 on your live after the game. Hell yeah, Texas Tags. I appreciate that. If that happens, I will definitely be doing it. Carlos Azuara comments, youtube.com/Paul Gallant. I'm not worried about Lamar. CJ has already done what Lamar has done in his whole career, and that's win one playoff game. That is held against Lamar Jackson, and it's a thing. He hasn't won yet. He hasn't won. Wait a second. Hang on. Ravens, Bills. Wasn't the... Oh, yeah. Well, hang on a second. I'm trying to think. Like, back in... a couple of years ago, I thought that Lamar Jackson won one playoff game. It was against the Titans. Yeah, it was against the Titans. He had that game where they won 20-13, and he won it with a touchdown run that he had towards the very end of the game. So they've won one playoff game, I suppose, since it was against the Titans. You maybe don't take it as seriously as against other teams. But he did win a playoff game, so that's just wrong. More comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Twitch.tv/Gallant says, Alexander the Texan says, CJ got Jesus on his side. That is hopefully true. More comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Terp Maniac comments, aren't the Ravens different as well? Yeah, they've clearly figured out what works. Like, I'm not taking the Ravens lightly at all. No one's played better down the stretch this season than Baltimore. No one. But I do think that the difference between the Ravens week 1 and week 18 versus the difference between the Texans week 1 and week 18, a team with a first-year head coach and a first-year quarterback, and of course one playoff game now under their belt as well. I think there's a bigger difference between the Texans then and now. That doesn't mean that the Texans have necessarily passed the Ravens, though. More comments here. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Brent Dismuke comments, Paul, what's your score prediction for Saturday? I'm not making one yet. We will do one on the Thursday show. I got to rewatch the game and try to get a feel for just how well the Texans were able to hold Baltimore's offense in check. Because that was really the most impressive thing that happened in that game. And you have to think, for the Ravens, second time around, you're going to have some pretty good ideas as to what works and what doesn't work against the Texans. And if Mark Andrews healthy, like, that's an entirely different game changer. All right, guys. Speaking of the weather with this game in Baltimore, likely to be 23 degrees, dropping to 19 degrees as the game goes on. The discourse about weather's impact on the NFL is driving me fucking crazy. Where did this anti-football in the elements movement come from? I saw my guy Landry Locker from Sports Radio 610. Check out his YouTube channel, The Locker Room, beating this drum of football should be played indoors. The Bills need an indoor stadium. They should be playing at their peak. And there's a lot of people making that argument, and I just hate it. I told Landry that on Saturday at NRG Stadium. I walked by him, and I said, I'm Landry Locker. Oh, I want to play in the balmy sun. I don't like the cold. I fucking hate it. And maybe it's because I'm a Yankee, I'm a Northerner, but football is the one sport where you play no matter the elements. And all of a sudden, people want it to be different. Who didn't love playing football in the snow if you had the opportunity to? Every single Saturday at college, when I was at Syracuse University, I'd go out and play tackle football with a bunch of friends and some players on the Syracuse club rugby team. And we would beat the shit out of each other. But when it was playing in the snow, it was fun. We would be cold for hours afterwards, but we would play in a foot of snow on fields that were not cleared off by a snowplow or heat. Now, again, this is the NFL versus pickup football. But football inherently is a violent, barbaric game that's played in weather extremes. The heat, rain, wind, fog, cold. And all of that has been part of the game's history forever. It sets it apart from all sports, including college football, because the college football season is done, generally, by early January, and you're not seeing a team play in a cold weather location outside of the occasional bowl really at all. I love that about the NFL. The Ice Bowl, the Fog Bowl, the multiple Patriots playoff games I went to, the best football in attendance memories of my life. The 03-04 AFC Championship game where it started snowing. The 04-05 divisional round of the playoffs where it started snowing. And I love that it started snowing because you knew that the Colts, who were an indoor team, were probably not going to do so well in it. Now, is that an unfair advantage? I suppose you can argue that, but the league every single year has been trending in this direction to seem more arcade, and I fucking hate it. This is a barbaric, brutal game. It's good that they invented the forward pass. People were literally dying playing this game. But we've gotten to a point now where everyone just wants gaudy numbers, gaudy statistics afterwards. Fantasy football season's over. What do you want the big numbers for? I want to watch two teams out-survive each other. And if they're doing it in the elements, so be it. And yeah, maybe it's not the most watchable or enjoyable product, but I appreciate the toughness of these guys going out there and playing in shitty weather. Because it's been part of the history of the game. Now we want to play indoors and on artificial turf. Fuck that. We barely have tackling anymore. Did you see what happened today in this game between the Bills and Steelers? I hate that a guy like Josh Allen can slide. Josh Allen can run over pretty much everybody that's past the defensive line on a defense that he goes up against. And he fakes a slide. And since everyone's so nervous about hitting a quarterback even slightly incorrectly, and then you saw a little bit later, he's bitching after a slide, after getting like love tapped on the head, and he gets a 15-yard penalty for it. He faked a fucking slide and ran for a 52-yard touchdown. What the fuck are we doing? And now on top of that, let's not play the elements. It's just soft. And I don't know, call me toxically masculine or an obnoxious Yankee blowhard. But as someone who grew up in the Northeast, I think watching a football game in the freezing cold is part of Northern football culture. I'm sure any Ravens fans that are in the chat right now, like, you get it. Once you sit through a game like this, you'll get it forever. And yeah, it's not pleasant. But I feel like it's like the only way a fan in attendance can connect with a player. Fuck, this is cold, but I'm going to stay here and root for my team. I mean, you're almost encouraging these guys to stay out there, to hang in there, to be tough. And yeah, there is maybe an unfair advantage for all those Southern teams, the Dolphins with their candy-ass uniforms playing in Kansas City, just looking cold the whole game. The dome teams, but I'm sorry. I love that part of football and the NFL specifically. And if your team wins in a game like this, you'll never forget it. Like, those are my favorite 2 football games I've ever been to, those 2 playoff games between the Patriots and Colts. I wish I had gone to a game earlier in the 2003-2004 season. The Patriots played the Dolphins. I want to say it was week 13. There was so much snow, people couldn't even sit in the seats. They're throwing snow up in the air after every score. I think Bills fans loved throwing snow up in the air. Definitely different. They weren't throwing dildos this time around, but anyone who was at that game today, a Bills fan, you loved it. That was a blast. And yeah, it was cold and probably miserable for some people. But I mean, you see every single year they're in the elements. See a bunch of hardos, usually fatty boom baddies who got a little bit of blubber on them. We're going shirtless out there and trying to root their team on. I love it. I love that element of it. And I have advice. Don't walk into the stadium too quickly if you're going to one of these cold games, because you might sweat. You don't want to sweat underneath your layers because it will get cold later. Bring a sleeping bag to sit in. I don't know what the NFL's clear bag policy says about bringing a sleeping bag. Maybe you should call your NFL team if you're going to a game like this. But bring a sleeping bag to sit in. When my sister and my dad, and I didn't get to go to every single Patriots game growing up. My dad had season tickets, but I moved with my mom to Florida. My dad and my sister stayed up in Massachusetts. Me being a bougie boy, my dad would fly me up for Patriots games. I mean, talk about living the life of privilege. My God, it was amazing. But there was a Patriots-Titans game the week before that Colts game that I saw in the snow. And in that game, the family, my dad, my sister, and some family friends of ours, they came to the game. They sat in sleeping bags the whole game. They were warm enough. And if you can't do that, sneak a flask in. That'll keep you warm, right? That'll keep you warm. Some comments, youtube.com/PaulGallant, twitch.tv/Gallant says. Some people are asking where I got the beanie. I actually went to Academy Sports and Outdoors today to get it. Bear Brother 123 comments. So Buffalo Bills fans don't want to build a new stadium, but they postponed the game because of too much snow. I agree. It's soft. It's soft. You know, I wish that they had brought some people from Syracuse, New York in there, because I went to college at Syracuse. It snowed so much there, and yet every single day the roads were clear. You would think that, like, the governor who puts this travel ban in effect would just conscript Syracuse salt guys who are so good at de-icing the roads. Some comments. Some people are wondering, hey, can't wait to hear the Ravens choked excuses after the Texans beat them. Maybe not. Look, I'm not putting the cart ahead of the horse right now. That's going to be a very difficult game. 100%. Jam says Texans 45, Ravens 27. Bro. Texans versus Lions Super Bowl. I want to see women rock and roll bands. Texans all the way to Super Bowl. Texans is the number one offensive defense. They're not the number one offensive defense. Come on, bro. AKTX asks, where's the varsity jacket? I wore it earlier today. You know what I'm going to do? You know what I'm going to do today, guys? And if you're listening to this podcast on Tuesday morning, trust me, I will do it. As a show of solidarity with the Houston Texans, and to prove my competitors are soft for hating the elements and hating games played in the cold, you know what I'm going to do today? I am going to walk the 1.1 miles from my home to the radio station tomorrow. Yeah, I'm going to walk to work tomorrow. Fuck it. Let's do a radio stunt. I'm going to walk. Oh, it's cold. Oh, it affects the game. No excuses. Be a man. Sack up. I think the Texans can do it. I think you can do it, especially if you're going to the game in Baltimore. Now, if you don't have work, don't walk to work. I legitimately live a mile away from work, but I'm going to walk to work. You know why? Because I'm fucking tough. I wasn't a all-district safety at the lowest level of high school in Florida for no reason. One of the hardest hitting tacklers in a division of primarily white people. I'm built different. I'll probably wear a ridiculous ski suit on my way in there, too. I have this awesome 1980s ski suit. I'm going to look good. I'm going to be warm the whole way through. Solidarity. H-Town forever, baby. All right. One last thing I wanted to touch on. I don't think the people who run marathons are soft. I think it's very impressive to run a marathon. That said, fuck the Houston Marathon and fuck marathoners, even though I respect their toughness because they ruined my Sunday. I do not understand why people run marathons. Again, I respect you for doing it. I don't get why you do it, though. Because you're not doing it to warn people about a Persian invasion like the original person did. And for those who don't know, the marathon is a long-distance foot race with a distance of 26 miles. It came from the legend of Philippides, who was a Greek messenger during the Battle of Marathon, which took place in August or September of 490 BC. He saw a Persian vessel changing its course towards Athens as the battle was near a victorious end for the Greek army. He interpreted this as an attempt by the defeated Persians to rush into the city to claim a false victory or simply raid, and then claim their authority over Greek land. Philippides allegedly, according to legend, ran the entire distance to Athens without stopping, discarding his weapons and even clothes to lose as much weight as possible. As he got to the assembly, he shouted, "Nenekikamen," which means "we have won" in Greek, before collapsing and dying. And there's been a couple of accounts of this. Who knows if it actually happened? It does seem more like mythology, and historians during the time were, let's just say, Michael Bay-esque, Herodotus and some of the others. You can't really tell if what's historically accurate and what was just some good old-fashioned great storytelling. But that's where the marathon came from. And then when they started the Olympics in the late 1800s, this was one of the first events around which the games would be centered. But everyone does it. You see every single city do it. And again, the people who actually do it, and I mean the ones who run the whole way through. If you walk, fuck you. You're not a real marathoner. But the people who do it, I respect your physical toughness. I could not run a marathon. I would never try to run a marathon. But fuck you for making me have to drive, trying to go 1 mile in Houston, there and back. How dare you force me to go 25 miles over an hour and 15 minutes? I kept track of it. I'm going to show you the map. I'm going to show you the map right now. So I live right about here. And as you can see, this black line is the marathon. So let's just say I had a friend over, and I was going to drop said friend off back at their place, which is about right here. So I forgot that the Houston Marathon was on, but I didn't think I was going to need to plan my day around it. So I get up and I do what I normally do, which is I drive towards the highway. 610. I figure I'm going to go up 610, maybe take a right on Woodway. That's the quickest way. GPS is not updated. So I get there and I notice, oh shit, I can't go any further. So here I am driving from here and then driving down. I drove this way on 59, did a U-E, came back this way on 59, go all the way to, I believe, the Shepherd exit, and I drive up, and I guess there was an underpass, and I'm able to drop the person off. They live in this general area. So then on the drive back, this is where things turned absolutely disastrous for me. I think to myself, you know what? There's a way back here. So I drive on Memorial to Woodway, and check that. No, I drove on San Felipe, basically the whole way back, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm gonna make it. Wait, maybe I did go on Woodway. Whatever the case, I drove and I get to Chimney Rock, and I'm like, I'm a street away from where I live, and then I notice the Chimney Rock is blocked off. So I go up thinking I'll be able to get to the highway or something like that and then come back down. Nope. Blocked off again. So I had to drive all the way back here, which took a while. Then get on 610, which is a nightmare these days. And then drive down and go on 59 to get back to the Fountain View exit and then drive back up. So I drove, again, about 22 to 23 and 45 minutes longer than I had to due to the Houston Marathon. And yes, I am the center of the world. I am the main character. I have Karen energy or whatever, you know? Main character energy. I don't fucking care. Fuck the Houston Marathon. Fuck marathons. Stop getting in my way. You ran the marathon, guess what? I hope you crapped yourself. I do. I hope you crapped yourself, and I am going to refrain from commenting on your Instagram post about the strength and resolve it took you to come in 6900th place. I'm not going to say anything, but just know that I fucking hate that you ruined my Sunday. If I ruined my Sunday, I mean, like, really just took about, like, 45 minutes of time that I had for me off of the clock. And there you go, guys. There you go. It's going to wrap up today's edition of the Gallant Says podcast. You missed any of the show, the whole video will be up on youtube.com/Paul Gallant. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the video. Also on twitch.tv/GallantSays. On Twitter, @GallantSays. Instagram, @SportsGallant. Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. Another episode coming Thursday. It'll also be available in podcast form wherever you get them. Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. One last comment from Half Nielsen. The marathon runners and critical mass bike riders need to have a battle to the death. I would sign up for that. If you ever have a question, gallantsays@gmail.com. So long, farewell. We'll have a Texans Ravens final predictions episode Thursday night. Until then, did I say so long, farewell? I'm so bad at wrapping these things up. Whatever. So long, farewell, and have yourselves a wonderful rest